You weren't a hero in their eyes, just a cleaner with a squeegee and a bucket, suspended high above the Pentagon's mirrored glass. That's what the junior officer muttered under his breath one morning as Samantha Ruiz wiped down the windows that reflected back the sky. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. Because one day, someone would finally read the sealed binder locked away in her footlocker since 2018. A binder stamped classified and signed by a general himself. And when that day came, the jokes would stop, the whispers would fade, and the truth would land harder than any salute ever could. Before we begin, let me ask you, if you believe that the quiet ones often see what the rest of us miss, if you believe experience doesn't always wear a uniform, then like and subscribe right now, because this story proves it. Samantha was 27, young enough that most on the Pentagon's grounds looked right through her, old enough that her eyes had already seen more than her share. Her title was simple: civilian contractor, window cleaner. She wasn't on payroll for strategy or combat. She wasn't issuing commands across battlefields. She was the one you barely noticed, moving with a harness and rope, squeegee in one hand, cloth in the other, keeping the glass spotless for those who thought the wars were theirs to fight. Yet every morning when she clipped in, when she rose with the slow grind of pulleys up the side of the nation's most guarded building, she carried more than soap and water. She carried memory. She carried training. She carried secrets most thought had retired with her discharge. The thing about being invisible is how much more you see. Soldiers in dress uniform didn't notice her when they hurried across the plaza, clipped voices echoing between the stone. Analysts with their phones glued to their palms didn't see her reflection watching from the 43rd pane above the ground. Generals in convoys of black sedans never asked who the figure was above their tinted windows, leaning out into the sky. Samantha knew it, accepted it, and wore that invisibility like armor. But invisibility cuts both ways. To them, she was nothing. To her, it meant everything was hers to notice. The way the sunlight bounced differently off certain panels. The subtle tremor of vibrations that didn't belong to wind. The whispers of machines that hummed where no machine should be. Samantha Ruiz hadn't started out here. She'd grown up in El Paso, chasing storms across desert highways, learning to read the sky before she could drive. The Air Force had been her dream, and at 20 she had stood proudly in uniform, wide-eyed and hungry, certain she'd serve a full career. Until the day her knees shattered during a high-speed evasive drill. One unlucky pivot, one sharp crack, and her dream was cut short with medical discharge papers she couldn't read without shaking. She had cried once, only once, then packed her duffel, tucked away the binder from her final classified assignment, an experimental simulation called Skybreaker, and walked out without a goodbye. The world didn't care about broken knees or broken plans. Bills had to be paid, so she found a job that let her stay close to the building that had once been her heartbeat. She cleaned its windows, washed its halls from the outside in, and never said a word about what she knew. The irony wasn't lost on her. The men inside the Pentagon carried ribbons across their chests, medals that flashed under light, decorations for missions most civilians would never understand. Samantha, the girl with a scar running down her leg and a rag in her pocket, carried none of that. Her recognition was silence. But silence doesn't erase skill. Silence doesn't delete memory. And every so often, as she crouched on her suspended platform hundreds of feet in the air, she'd glance down at the guards clustered at the gates, laughing, mocking, unaware. And she'd think, if only you knew what sits in my footlocker. If only you knew what I was trained to do. She made routine sacred. Harness checked 3 times, ropes tested before every climb, each pain measured by instinct. She worked as if someone was always watching, though no one ever did. At lunch, she sat by herself with a thermos of black coffee, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, and a notebook filled not with doodles or shopping lists, but sketches of sky grids, intercept patterns, signals no one here even remembered. Her coworkers sometimes teased her. "What's with all the scribbles, Ruiz? Dreaming of architecture school?" She would just smile faintly, tuck the book deeper into her bag, and let them laugh. Let them think she was nothing more than glass and soap. But she wasn't nothing. She was waiting. Waiting not for recognition, not for applause, but for the day when waiting would end. When all those hours of silence, of being overlooked, would collapse into a single moment where she would no longer be the one cleaning the reflection. She would be the one shaping what the reflection saw. And if the world had forgotten her training, that was fine. Because she hadn't. She never would. And so, day after day, Samantha Ruiz climbed the walls of the Pentagon, steady as sunrise. To the young lieutenants who smirked, she was a background detail. To the analysts glued to screens, she was a blur in the window. But to the woman herself, she was something else entirely. A sentry in plain sight. A soldier without a uniform. A silent guardian waiting for the words she thought she might never hear again. Initiate the sky breaker gambit. It began with a flicker. The kind of shimmer most people would blame on glare, sunlight bending just so across the Pentagon's panels. But Samantha Ruiz had been watching the sky since she was a child, and she knew what reflections belonged and which ones didn't. This one was wrong. Too sharp, too deliberate, the kind of echo you only saw when something foreign lingered where it shouldn't. She paused mid-stroke, her squeegee hovering in the air, eyes narrowing. Most people would have blinked it away. Samantha pressed her gloved hand to the glass, anchoring herself against the harness, and leaned just slightly farther into the open air. The shimmer wasn't gone. Down below, traffic hummed along Route 27, soldiers filed through checkpoints, and tourists snapped photos near the memorial benches. No one looked up. No one noticed that the sky above them had changed. No one but her. She climbed down slowly, unhooking her gear with deliberate calm, and carried her supplies back inside. She didn't run. Running gets you ignored faster than silence. But when she walked past the checkpoint, she caught the young lieutenant's smirk again. Long day polishing glass, Ruiz. Careful, you might scrub so hard you'll see Mars. The chuckles from his friends rolled like cheap thunder. Samantha didn't respond. Instead, she scribbled a quick report, as plain as she could. Possible interference on south panels. Recommend scan for reflective anomalies. She left it on the duty desk where she knew it would be read and filed. Maybe laughed at, maybe trashed. But at least it would exist. A seed planted. The next morning, her seed sprouted, not in recognition, but in ridicule. As she clipped into her harness, one of the maintenance techs waved a printout of her report. You trying to be CIA now, Ruiz? We'll call you Agent Windex. More laughter. She smiled politely, clipped the carabiner to the rope, and let herself rise into the sky again. If they wanted to joke, let them. The sky was still talking, and she was still listening. 3 nights later, the alarms woke the building. Not the fire drills they ran every quarter, not the muted tones of routine evacuation. This one was sharp, shrill, laced with urgency. An unidentified aerial incursion had tripped the Pentagon's perimeter sensors. The command center lit up with flashing maps, swarming icons, chatter overlapping in a panicked chorus. Drones, someone shouted. Experimental swarm patterns, another voice guessed. Signals jammed. Screens stuttered, then froze. Samantha wasn't supposed to be there. Contractors weren't called into the command center during emergencies. But when the first alarm sounded, she'd been finishing her shift in the East Wing, and the chaos had pulled her with it. She drifted with the current of uniforms until she found herself pressed against the back wall of the operations floor, unseen among the crush of analysts and officers. She watched as they scrambled, watched as seasoned majors barked orders into dead calms, watched as the screens refused to obey. It would have been almost funny if it weren't terrifying. They had technology layered over technology, systems stacked higher than the very walls, but they had no eyes. They didn't understand the pattern. Samantha's stomach tightened. She recognized it. The pulse of interference, the staggered reflections she had seen days earlier. She had seen it in training. Not just any training. Skybreaker. Reset the main relay, a colonel barked. No effect, sir. Reboot the array. Already cycling. The room buzzed like a hive of wasps. Noise without clarity. Then the doors opened. A hush fell. General Markham entered. He wasn't the kind of man who needed volume to command attention. His stride alone reset the rhythm of the room. He approached the central console, scanned the frozen screens, and let the silence stretch. Finally, his voice came, steady, low, like steel wrapped in calm. Who filed the interference report last week? The analysts glanced around, confusion rippling. A sergeant fumbled with a folder, flipping through until a single sheet emerged. Possible interference on south panels. Recommend scan. Markham took it, eyes narrowing. His head lifted, gaze sweeping the room until it landed on her. Samantha's pulse jolted. For a second, she thought maybe he'd look past her, see only the uniformed chaos. But his eyes stayed fixed. "Ruiz," he said, his voice cutting through the din. The room stilled. Every head turned. "The cleaner?" Murmurs rippled. "What's she doing here?" Markham didn't flinch. "You trained on Skybreaker, didn't you?" Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she couldn't answer. How did he know? That file had been sealed. The simulation wasn't spoken of outside briefing rooms, and those briefings had ended years ago. But the general's face was unyielding, waiting, certain. She nodded once. His next words were softer, but they shook the air like thunder. "Then initiate the Skybreaker Gambit." The operations floor went silent. Some stared at him in disbelief, others at her, as if she'd just grown wings. Samantha stepped forward, her harness still slung against her hip, hands smudged with cleaning solution, hair tied back in a simple braid. She looked nothing like the analysts in pressed uniforms, nothing like the officers with gleaming insignia. But when she slid into the empty chair at the console, her fingers moved with certainty, like they'd been waiting for this very moment. The screens flickered. Interference patterns mapped themselves under her keystrokes. Swarm trajectories emerged where others had seen only static. She whispered commands the system hadn't heard in years, protocols buried under layers of bureaucracy. The drone signals, once a storm of chaos, began to align, revealing weaknesses only someone who had studied Skybreaker's doctrine could spot. The analysts leaned in. The colonels muttered under their breath. General Markham folded his arms, unshaken. For the first time that night, the Pentagon wasn't blind. It was watching, because the window cleaner they had ignored, the contractor they had mocked, was now the only one who could see. And the breach, whatever it was about to learn that invisibility cuts both ways. The room was frozen, but Samantha Ruiz's hands were not. They moved across the console with a rhythm that felt less like typing and more like remembering. Remembering a drill no one else here had ever run. Remembering the way instructors whispered about it in locked rooms. Remembering the weight of failure in a simulation that had never been meant to leave paper. The Skybreaker Gambit wasn't flashy. It wasn't firepower. It was pattern recognition so precise, so demanding, that only those who had memorized the rhythm of chaos could wield it. And she had. The first signal broke like a ripple across the screen. Drone swarm interference, once a storm of white noise, folded into neat channels under her commands. "Sector 9 is realigned," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, steady, but every syllable pulled the room tighter around her. Analysts leaned in. Officers stared in disbelief. Lieutenant Connors, the same one who had called her Agent Windex, now stood frozen, color draining from his face. Another keystroke. Another flicker. Sector 12, blind zone cleared. On the map, red icons blinked, staggered, then froze as her overrides severed their control. A colonel muttered under his breath. "That's impossible, she's rewriting the intercept grid manually." General Markham didn't flinch. His eyes stayed on her, as though every move confirmed something he had known all along. "Continue," he said, his tone carrying no doubt, no hesitation. Samantha pressed her palm flat against the screen, aligning the last sequence. The system hissed, protested, then obeyed. One by one, the swarm collapsed. Signals neutralized. Paths rerouted. By the time the command center's emergency generators stabilized the full array, the intruding drones had scattered into harmless fragments, their control nodes locked out, their data feeds captured. Silence. For a moment, the room simply sat in it. The silence of disbelief. The silence of men and women who had thought they were the smartest in the building, now realizing the answers had come from someone they'd never even saluted. Samantha leaned back slowly, exhaling for the first time since her fingers had touched the console. Her scarred knee ached under the strain, but her posture was unbroken. She had done it, not to prove them wrong, not for applause, but because the Pentagon was her post, even if no one else had ever believed it. The first voice came shaky. What just happened?" Markham stepped forward. His presence filled the room without raising his volume. "What happened," he said evenly, "is that you were saved by the woman you've been ignoring every day you walked through these doors. You mocked her, dismissed her, called her a cleaner. But tonight, she did what none of you could. She initiated Skybreaker." Whispers erupted. "Skybreaker? That's a myth. It was discontinued years ago. Classified. Who trained her? Markham's gaze swept the floor. I did. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Samantha froze, stunned. She hadn't known. She remembered the simulation instructors, the faceless directives, but never connected them to the man standing before her now. Markham's jaw was set like granite. I was there when she ran it. She didn't just pass. She was the only candidate to complete the sequence in full. And when she was discharged, her file was sealed. Not because she failed, because one day, this day, we might need her. The weight of his words landed like a hammer. Officers who had sneered looked away. Analysts who had scoffed now stared at her notebook tucked in her back, realizing it had never been doodles. Markham continued, his voice steady. Remember this moment. The Pentagon was not secured tonight by strikes or stars. It was secured by someone you all overlooked. By a woman who carried silence like armor. And when the time came, she didn't hesitate. Samantha lowered her eyes. She didn't want their applause. She didn't want their pity. She wanted them to understand. Slowly, she rose from the console, her hands steady at her sides. I didn't do it for recognition, she said softly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. I did it because this place is mine to protect, even if all I ever do is wash its windows. The words sank deep. No one dared laugh. No one dared smirk. For the first time, they saw her not as the girl on the harness, but as the quiet sentinel she had always been. The incident never reached the press. Official reports labeled it routine systems interference. No medals were pinned, no headlines written. But inside the Pentagon, the story spread in whispers. The cleaner who saved the building. The woman the general himself called back to duty. Weeks later, a small plaque appeared in the maintenance wing, placed without ceremony. For the one who saw through the glass. No name, no dates, just a line that every contractor and officer alike paused to read. Samantha never acknowledged it, never claimed it. But when she passed it on her way to the service elevators, she allowed herself the smallest of smiles. And every morning after, when she rose on her harness, squeegee in hand, she didn't just see her reflection in the glass anymore. She saw theirs, straighter postures, steadier eyes, salutes offered first. Respect that no longer came from pity, but from truth. Because Samantha Ruiz hadn't just cleaned windows. She had seen through them. She had reminded the Pentagon that silence doesn't mean absence. Invisibility doesn't mean weakness. And sometimes, the person you least expect is the one standing between chaos and order. And though she never said it aloud, every time her fingers brushed the scar on her knee, she carried the words like a quiet vow. Skybreaker wasn't just a simulation. It was who I was meant to be.